Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today for our Day of Change, Inspiring Hope and Resilience. The purpose of this day is to promote a deeper understanding of sexual harassment and assault, discuss the societal influences and structures that contribute to these issues, and provide information about what we can all do to foster a safer and more supportive community. For those struggling with strong feelings as a result of these presentations, please know that there are resources available to students. There is a link in a Canvas announcement that will lead you to a list of available resources. Firstly, the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center's mission is to end sexual violence and empower survivors to heal and provide education and advocacy for social change. Also, if you ever experience a mental health emergency, the Samaritan statewide helpline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The contact information for both of these resources will be provided later on in this session and also on our resources document. We want to create an environment that is safe and healthy, where people feel like they can be brave and learn. To do this, we ask that everyone, both during our time in this room and after, listen to each other, be respectful and supportive, and be kind. Because topics like this are difficult to discuss and uncomfortable feelings can cause people to joke around or be unkind, we expect all participants to handle things in a mature manner. We all commit to being thoughtful of what we say to one another. This session is called Framing the Conversation. Our presentation will include foundational information on key terms and topics for the purpose of providing an understanding of how patriarchal oppression and the subsequent culture impact everyone. In addition, the presentation will consider the emotional and behavioral effects of various forms of sexual misconduct. We are hopeful that you will learn a lot during this session. However, there is a good chance that this information may make you feel uncomfortable and or upset. If that becomes the case, please feel free to step out at any time. There are guidance counselors and social workers here to support you right now. You can stop by, call, or email them. Find a trusted adult. Please know that staff are available to you every day at BHS. The goal of today is to open informed conversations about how the patriarchy and systems of gender oppression affect and are perpetuated by everyone. We know liberation from this oppression involves the work of every single one of us, and it will liberate us all. We hope that by starting these conversations, we can begin to inform and inspire change. We're teaching these lessons knowing that individual education is just one part of many pieces of change that it will take to make an overall systemic difference. Our work starts with having these conversations, but our movement does not end with them. Day of Change will examine several difficult topics related to sexual violence and systems of gender-based oppression. In order to have productive and helpful conversations that inspire growth, we need to have some common conversational norms. First of all, today we will learn about how identity impacts the way in which we experience the world around us. We have a lot to learn from one another, as we have all had different levels of exposure to these issues. Often, if something someone says does not align with what we have experienced, we dismiss it as false. Today, we must try our best to keep an open mind and to listen to others with the active intention of understanding in order to foster safe conversations. Second, when having these different conversations, it is important to assume best intentions in one another. With that being said, regardless of intent, it is crucial to take responsibility for the unintentional harm that our words and behaviors may cause. Next, in order to hold one another accountable, we must be able to hold difficult conversations without it feeling like an attack. Today, we will be practicing calling one another into the conversations. When we call someone out, we isolate them and promote feelings of shame. By calling one another in, we're promoting learning and understanding. Calling someone in can sound like, "What you said just now hurt me, and I'd like to call you in to understand why your words were harmful." When calling someone in, we leave space for everyone to have a reaction and foster conversation and, most importantly, growth. Next, there is no single truth. We all experience life in different ways and hold our own personal truths in every situation. Today, we're going to be using both and language rather than but or. Last, but certainly not least, today we will speak to one another with respect. We will respect one another's beliefs, experiences, and words. We will not invalidate one another, and we will speak to one another with kindness. A mandated reporter is legally required to report any suspicion of child abuse or neglect, including sexual assault. All staff at BHS classify as mandated reporters, and this is extremely important to keep in mind today. One of today's goals is to promote internal and communal growth. Often when talking about systems of oppression, we act as though these systems are not present in the space we are in. This makes it harder to have informed conversations where asking questions, making mistakes, and holding each other accountable is hard. We acknowledge that the patriarchy, racism, and other systems of oppression have been internalized into all of us and constantly operate in our educational institution. This session will include foundational information on key terms and topics for the purpose of providing an understanding of how patriarchal oppression and the subsequent culture impacts everyone. In addition, this presentation will consider the emotional and behavioral effects of various forms of sexual misconduct. To start off, we will be discussing what the patriarchy is. The patriarchy is a system that gives an advantage to cisgender men, which leads to the systemic oppression of everyone who does not identify as a cis man. Even though the patriarchy provides an advantage to cis men, it is harmful to everyone, which we will delve into later on today. One of the most frequent ways that the patriarchy presents itself is through misogyny, which is most commonly defined as a hatred, dislike, or distrust of women. Another word for misogyny is sexism. Misogyny is not something exclusively experienced by cisgender women. Misogyny can affect trans men, cisgender and transgender women, non-binary people, and people who choose to express their gender in traditionally feminine ways, among others. Because of this, we use the term misogyny affected and non-misogyny affected people to highlight that gender oppression never operates exclusively in the binary. The symbol that you see on the screen currently indicates that the next slide will have heavy and potentially triggering content. This slide will pop up throughout presentations today, followed by a short pause to give time for an individual to prepare for the content or decide to skip to the next part. We encourage you all to do whatever feels right when you see this sign, whether it be taking a drink of water, taking a walk, turning off your camera, or going to seek support from a BHS social worker or guidance counselor. What is consent? We will be talking about consent in terms of FRIES. FRIES means freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. To start, we will talk about what freely given means. Both people have given consent without being forced, tricked, or intoxicated beyond the point of making a reasonable decision. When talking about consent being reversible, this means that consent can be revoked at any time, even once a sexual act has begun. Consent should be informed. Honesty is important when engaging in sexual activity. For example, telling someone you're going to use a condom and then not using one is not consent. Consent should be enthusiastic. The people consenting are both excited and willing participants. And consent should be specific. Consent is required for different sexual activities and should be re-given if the sexual act changes. Internally ask yourself this true or false statement. Consent can be reversed without speaking. This statement is true. Consent can be reversed without speaking. As we covered in our FRIES definition, we know consent has to be explicitly given. However, it can be denied non-verbally. This can look like pushing someone off or away, not responding to touches or advances, disengaging from what is happening, or being intoxicated or unconscious. A lack of a yes should be taken as a no and treated as such. Verbal rejection of consent is not necessarily a straight up no. Other verbal rejections of consent could include, but are not limited to, I don't like that, stop, maybe later, this hurts or is uncomfortable, can we do something else, I don't feel well, or I'm too intoxicated. Consent should sound like clear excitement and enthusiasm, such as, yes, I like this, or yes, this feels good, or yes, you can touch me there. Opening the dialogue while engaging in sexual acts surrounding what the parties are comfortable with should be encouraged and welcome. There are many factors that play into the reason why it may be challenging for someone to say no in situations where consent is asked. By becoming aware of these potential dynamics, it becomes easier for us to move throughout interpersonal relationships in the world. One factor is power disparities. A power disparity refers to a situation in which one person holds power over one another. This could be a teacher or coach and a student. It could also happen anywhere in the workplace between a boss and an employee. Any situation where a power imbalance is there, it could be more difficult to say no for fear of it affecting your job, grades, or relationship with people. Another example of a power imbalance is age differences, especially in high school, where age and grade could play into how much power a person holds socially. For example, it may be harder for a freshman or sophomore to say no to an upperclassman for fear of social isolation, rumors being spread, or retaliation. Intimidation is another reason why it may be difficult for someone to say no. Incapacitation makes it very difficult for someone to say no because drugs and alcohol affect your brain's ability to function and pass judgment. Therefore, a person cannot consent when they are incapacitated from drugs or alcohol. Signs of incapacitation include slurred words or incoherent sentences, vomiting, inability to stay conscious, walk straight, or remember. If you find someone incapacitated, the best thing to do is make sure that they are in a safe space with a trusted person with them. If medical attention is necessary, it should be found. What is rape culture? Rape culture describes a society that has normalized sexual violence as something that is inevitable and puts the burden of responsibility of ending sexual violence on the victims instead of the perpetrators. The normalization of small things, such as locker room talk, creates an atmosphere in which larger things, for example, assault and domestic violence, are able to be normalized and accepted. To expand on this definition, we will watch a short video.
Rape culture. It's a term that describes an environment where rape is pervasive,
normalized,
and accepted as inevitable.
Rape culture does not necessarily mean that society or individual people promote sexual violence in an outward, active manner.
Rather, rape culture is largely perpetuated via unexamined and false beliefs.
Some examples of rape culture include myths about sexual violence,
victim blaming,
language that trivializes rape,
jokes,
sexual objectification in ads,
images that glamorize sexual violence,
song lyrics that send confusing and harmful messages about consent, and much more.
Rape culture teaches people not to get raped.
We should be teaching people not to rape.
Rape culture normalizes sexual violence, and as a result, a victim survivor may not understand what happened to them as rape.
They may think they are overreacting
and decide not to talk to someone, get help, or report the violence.
Even if they do recognize what happened to be sexual violence, rape culture can cause them to blame themselves,
feel guilty and or ashamed, and feel afraid that they will not be believed,
including by professionals and authorities.
How can we challenge rape culture?
We can start by believing survivors.
We can also examine our own internalized beliefs and prejudices about gender roles, sexuality, and sexual violence.
We can think about and question sexist and otherwise oppressive messages we encounter in pop culture and media.
We can challenge others if we hear them repeating rape myths or making victim-blaming statements or rape jokes.
Everyone deserves to live safely.
We all have a role in ending sexual violence.
Toxic masculinity is a culture of pressure directed at men to behave in a violent, homophobic, and anti-feminine way which negatively impacts themselves and society as a whole. Such culture directly leads to gender-based violence, anti-LGBTQ violence, issues with mental health, along with suppression of emotions and trauma. Toxic masculinity is simultaneously societal and interpersonal. It occurs in friend groups, within families, in school and sports, and internally within male-identifying people. Content warning, next slide, sexual harassment. Sexual harassment describes unwanted sexual advances or behavior that makes a person feel uncomfortable. Sexual harassment can manifest verbally, visually, or physically. Sexual harassment includes unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature, for example, catcalling. Sexual harassment does not always have to be specifically about a sexual behavior or directed at a specific person. For example, negative comments as women as a group may be a form of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment can also occur in a variety of circumstances, and the harasser can identify with any gender and have any relationship to the survivor. Content warning, next slide, sexual assault. Sexual assault is sexual contact that happens without explicit and enthusiastic consent. Sexual assault may include, but is not limited to, unwanted sexual touching, such as groping, using threats to obtain sexual favors, forcing someone to perform sexual acts, or sexual contact with minors. Content warning, next slide, sexual coercion. Sexual coercion is generally defined as pressuring someone into sexual acts while wearing them down and/or manipulating them or threatening them. Sexual coercion could be presented as using blackmail or threats, repeatedly asking to gain sexual favors after an individual has already said no, or purposefully getting someone intoxicated so that they are less likely to be able to refuse sexual favors. Sexual coercion can also be presented as guilt tripping techniques, such as, if you really loved me, you would do this, or we've been dating for so long, everyone's doing that, you owe me this, or I'll break up with you, hurt myself, or release your nude pictures if you don't do this for me. Sexual coercion falls under the category of sexual assault. We understand that we just covered a lot of heavy content, and we encourage everyone to take a 3-minute break to digest what we just went over and to take a breather. This video will proceed with a 3-minute mindful meditation that you may choose to participate in if you so choose. If not, still take a few minutes to yourself and then skip to the next part. Remember to remain respectful, mindful, and kind in your interactions with your peers.
You are okay. Just take a couple of deep breaths at your own pace, in and out. Feel the air flow into your lungs and let your muscles relax. Taking deep, comforting breaths. For these few moments, forget about the past. Let go of your worry about the future. Just breathe, relax, find stillness. Continue to breathe gently and naturally. And whether out loud or in your head, repeat these words. I am okay. I am calm. I am present. I am still. Great job. You can do this. Fear and anxiousness will not overpower you. You are strong. You are okay. And finally, we will count from 5 to 1 and continue bringing yourself here into this present moment. And then you will return to where you were before, ready and able to continue in peace and stillness in your heart and mind. You are okay. You can do this. Counting 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Content warning, next slides. Effect of rape culture. How does rape culture affect our interactions with ourselves and with other people? One of the most prevalent reactions to sexual violence is placing blame for misconduct on the survivor rather than the perpetrator. This video shows how individuals and society often look at survivors of sexual assault and speaks to the framework that places the burden of ending gender-based violence on the survivor, not on the perpetrator.
Here, have you heard?
No, what's the crack?
James is dead.
What? Oh my god, no way, what happened?
Apparently somebody killed him at a party.
What party? Was he there on his own?
Some big house party on Friday.
Jesus, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Was he drinking at the party?
I don't know. Probably some, like it was a party.
Yeah, 'cause alcohol makes it harder to fight off a murder, and then he might have made some bad choices about who he was talking to. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I'm sure everyone was having a wee drink, like.
Yeah. And here, what was he wearing?
What?
Well, you know the way he wears all them V-neck t-shirts?
Yeah, but...
Listen, I'm just saying, if you don't want to get stabbed in the neck, maybe wear a polo neck or something.
I don't think that really...
And James was really friendly, wasn't he?
Yeah, poor James.
I mean, he was so outgoing.
Yeah, he was sound.
He'd have talked to anyone.
Yeah.
So, it's no surprise that he eventually came across a murder.
What?
I'm just saying, if you don't want to get murdered, don't be going about talking to strangers at parties and just expect everything to be alright. Did he trigger his murder alarm that we were given that time?
No, it was probably in his coat pocket or something. Oh, the murder happened so fast.
His coat pocket? Hardly any use there, is it? He should have been more careful. Nobody ever thinks it'll happen to them.
I guess. His family must be devastated.
I know, they must be so skundered that he let himself get murdered like that. They must be mortified.
What? No,
So did they find out who did it? I mean, assuming it was a murder and all, and not some assisted suicide thing. Here, maybe James really wanted this to happen.
No, he definitely didn't. And it was definitely Robert. Some people walked in on the murder, but they didn't think it was any of their business.
Robert? No way. He's dead on. Like, he's definitely not a murderer.
He is. He definitely did it.
Yeah, well, he just felt like ending James's life, and he did, but he's not a murderer. Besides, James was jailbait, you know?
What?
I mean, he just had that look, you know, that you could totally see wanting to commit a crime and murder him. It's perfectly normal. Poor Robert. Really, it's desperate how many young people's lives are ruined just because they kill a few people.
Rape culture, along with other systems of oppression, such as racism, create a culture that rewards silence or quick fixes for issues. Disrupting our culture is not normalized. The responsibility of ending sexual assault falls onto survivors rather than the perpetrators. We ask, what was she wearing? How many people did they sleep with? Why were they walking alone? We say, he would never do that. He has a bright future. They're making it up for attention. They're going to ruin their career. What we do not ask ourselves as a society is, why do men rape? We know that the patriarchy is embedded into society in a systemic way, and we can see this in our criminal justice system. Out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, only 5 perpetrators will be incarcerated. The combination of our cultural attitudes towards survivors, as well as our criminal justice system's failure to protect female-identifying people, sends a strong message of neglect to survivors. Both of these factors directly feed into the culture of stigma, which is especially prevalent among male-identifying survivors, who are even less encouraged to come forward due to societal and personal shame. Rape culture is predominant in social life and can have impacts on an individual and communal level. Common occurrences of rape culture in social life that play into systemic rape culture includes the normalization of integrated relationships, specifically in high school. Starting at a young age, many teenagers, specifically young women, are taken interest in by upperclassmen. This creates a power dynamic in which the upperclassman is able to take advantage of the underclassman's lack of experience and lack of ability to stand up for themselves. This is not to say that this is always the case. However, we cannot ignore the power dynamics that can occur, as these relationships can have sustained negative impacts on individuals. Additionally, there is a large developmental difference between adolescents, even a couple of years apart. Rape culture in social life specifically presents itself online, especially in this day and age when information and pictures are able to be distributed to mass amounts of people in quick succession. This frequently happens in group chats, private or public stories, and on social media such as TikTok, Instagram, or Snapchat. This looks like the objectification of women, such as rating or comparing individuals based on their appearance, distributing nude or explicit photos of people online. And we can also see the objectification of women in pornography, which glorifies and romanticizes violence against women, slut shaming, sexual coercion, and pedophilia. These are just some of the ways that rape culture presents itself online. Internally ask yourself whether this statement is true or false. Sexual misconduct cannot occur between romantic partners. This statement is false. A common misconception about sexual misconduct is that if a perpetrator and survivor are in a romantic relationship, sexual misconduct cannot occur. This is false because a perpetrator can have any identity and any sort of relationship to the survivor. In fact, many instances of sexual misconduct occur between people who have a close relationship of mutual trust and respect. There are several types of abuse that occur in intimate romantic relationships. Emotional abuse often precedes, occurs with, and or follows physical or sexual abuse in relationships. Sexual acts may be committed through physical force, threats of force against an individual, or fear tactics which imply that physical force will be used if sexual acts are resisted. There is also the idea that an individual owes their partner sex. However, any partner is completely permitted to say no at any given time. As well as having extreme and lasting impacts systemically and in social settings, rape culture also impacts individuals on a personal and emotional level. The effects of rape culture can include both initial physical trauma as well as deep psychological trauma that follows. From the words of Bessel van der Kolk, trauma results in a fundamental reorganization of the way mind and brain manage perceptions. It changes not only how we think and what we think about, but also our very capacity to think. Content warning, next slides, trauma and PTSD. What is trauma? Trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. These events are perceived by the individual as threats to survival and physical integrity. They include threats not just to ourselves, but also potentially to people we care about or identify with. In many people, trauma won't have extremely long-lasting negative effects, and individuals will be able to move forward as normal, but others will have more difficulty overcoming their trauma and will experience long-lasting stress reactions to it. Traumatic experience complicate an individual's capacity to make sense of their lives and to create meaningful and consistent relationships in their families and communities. What is PTSD? One of the most common trauma disorders that survivors of sexual misconduct may be faced with is post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is a mental health condition that is triggered by having witnessed or experienced a terrifying event. The disorder is diagnosed if symptoms last for over a month. The lifetime prevalence of PTSD for women who have been sexually assaulted is 50%. Moreover, sexual assault is the most frequent cause of PTSD in women, with one study reporting that 94% of women experience PTSD symptoms during the first 2 weeks after an assault, and 30% report PTSD symptoms 9 months following the assault. Symptoms of PTSD also may not become apparent until months or years following the traumatic event or events. Content warning, emotional effects of trauma. How can trauma affect an individual emotionally? Post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma in general can have adverse effects on an individual's emotional, mental, and physical well-being for an extended period of time. One of the main outcomes of trauma presents itself in re-traumatization, which is any situation or environment that resembles an individual's trauma literally or symbolically, which then triggers difficult feelings and reactions associated with the original trauma. Re-traumatization may present itself in several different ways. For example, intrusive memories, flashbacks, or nightmares as if reliving the traumatic event or events, which can often induce dissociation from reality and bring on anxiety or panic attacks. Re-traumatization is often unintentional and can take the form of specific smells, sounds, or types of interactions that are a reminder of the traumatizing event or events. Something common that may be seen in an individual with PTSD is the avoidance of anything that may remind them of the traumatic event. This could include avoiding people, places, or objects, or anything else that brings up intrusive memories of the event. Individuals will also likely block out memories of these circumstances and avoid thinking or talking about them at all costs. A negative mindset and mood can manifest itself into an overall feeling of hopelessness, numbness, and self-blame. Trauma can also impact changes in physical and emotional reactions, increasing the likelihood that an individual with trauma will stay on guard and get scared easily, have abnormal anger reactions, or feel disoriented. Survivors could experience either short or long-term psychological effects of sexual misconduct. One of the most common psychological consequences of sexual misconduct is self-blame. Survivors use self-blame as an avoidance-based coping tool. Self-blame slows or, in many cases, stops the healing process. Healing from trauma does not mean that the survivor will forget the experience or never again experience any symptoms. Rather, successful recovery is subjective and measured by whether the survivor increases his or her involvement in the present, acquires skills and attitudes to regain control of their life, forgives themselves for guilt, shame, or other negative cognitions, and gains stress reduction skills for overall better functioning. There are many options to get help for yourself or your loved ones, whether it be talking to someone at BHS, outside BHS, or practicing self-care. Now that we are aware of the social and emotional impacts that systems of gender oppression influence, how can we move forward as a more educated and supportive community? The 4 R's of trauma-informed care highlight how to exhibit resilience following the impacts that trauma may have on individuals. The first step is to realize the widespread impacts of trauma and understand potential paths towards recovery. We will cover some self-care techniques in this lesson and more in depth during the last block of the day. The second step is to recognize the signs, symptoms, and significance of these symptoms so that we can better understand our peers and also ourselves. After realization and recognition, our next step is to respond by integrating our knowledge of the social and emotional impacts of gender oppression and sexual misconduct into our community so that we may make necessary adjustments for individuals who may experience symptoms of trauma. Our last step is to resist the normalization of sexual misconduct by educating ourselves and our community about these issues and calling in our peers when necessary. This also means we need to be mindful of how an individual may have been impacted. These steps aren't easy, but by educating ourselves on the severity that sexual misconduct has had on countless individuals, we can start to create a safer and more supportive community at BHS and in our community. Remember that you are not alone and we are all here for you. No one should have to fight through the impacts of sexual misconduct alone. It's extremely important to mobilize a support system with trusted peers and adults in order to reach out and connect with others. We will be providing a document linked to Canvas with resources on how to take care of yourself if you are a survivor of sexual misconduct, how to listen to and help others who are survivors, along with many resources on reporting inside BHS or outside BHS with confidentiality. Look for the posters in the bathrooms at BHS or our resource document for our decision tree, which will walk you through your options for reporting if you identify as a survivor of sexual misconduct or if you are worried about someone else who does. Who is here to help? If you or someone you know has experienced sexual violence and you wish to reach out for anonymous support, please contact the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center hotline by phone 24/7. Their number you can see up on the screen now. If you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts, contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you are struggling with other mental health challenges, the National Alliance on Mental Illness offers mental health education, resources, and a helpline. If you think a crime has been committed, contact Dorian Gallagher at the Brookline Police Department. BHS social workers and guidance counselors are always here to help as well. If you are unsure of who your social worker or guidance counselor is, ask your advisory teacher. Resilience does not involve returning to our original form. We can never be the same. What stretches us launches us forward. What compresses pulls from deep within us the strength to break out. You feel the pain, say a prayer, make a plan. That is when the magic happens. You can feel yourself expand with pure strength. Then you know, whatever storm is coming, you will continue to rise. You are that strong. A quote by Jennifer Bostic. Thank you so much for attending this session. Our mission is to make BHS a more educated, safe, and supportive environment, and this starts with each of you listening and learning from days such as these. We are hopeful that you learned more about framing the conversation of gender disparities and sexual misconduct. Please take care of yourselves and others. Again, we have a document linked to Canvas on information about ways to manage strong negative emotions and contact information for local mental health supports. As a reminder, please reach out to your trusted adults, including guidance counselors, social workers, psychologists, and teachers if you need support. Ask for help. You are seen and heard, and we are all here for you. Thank you for engaging. Please take 5 to 10 minutes to go take a breather to debrief with yourself the content that we just covered, and then come back and you may journal to yourself any of these 5 reflection questions that we have offered for you. Again, thank you for attending, and we hope that you learned a lot and that you will continue to learn about the systems of gender oppression and sexual misconduct throughout the rest of the day.